Hey James, how you doing?
Doing great, man. It's been good.
So, folks listening, if you've been following this podcast, you'll know that my family has these chickens now. We have 4 chickens. And thankfully, they are no longer in my office, which is why you won't hear any loud squawking during this episode. It happened in my last episode with Justin Yursitz. It was got a little crazy in here. So they're in a real coop now. It's about 20 feet away in the yard here. And the other day I realized that raising backyard chickens is kind of like building an app and then sending it out into the world. You know, these chickens they're actually free ranging right now in the backyard, and they're vulnerable to all kinds of things, the elements, predators, whatever weird things they might eat. I don't know. I mean, they're even small enough that they could get through gaps in our fence and escape. But unlike with apps, there's no way to test your chickens to make sure they're ready for the real world. You know, you just throw them out there and hope for the best. But the funny thing, James, with these chickens is that they somehow knew instinctively what to do. When we got the coop and we installed it and everything, we put them in the chicken run, and they just naturally ventured up this like ladder that they have into the little house part of the coop all on their own. We didn't even show it to them or anything. So whether that's just out of curiosity or out of some like inherent co-evolution of people and chickens and coops, it's amazing. They free range around the yard all day, and then at night they just put themselves to bed in the coop, and we just say goodnight and lock it up. But apps, unfortunately, do not do that. They don't fix themselves in any way. They don't take care of themselves. This is a little bit of a stretch in my opening segment. But everybody, welcome to Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility worldwide. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all. This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propelics. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propelics is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propelics clients include large companies like Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propelics' menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts, covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing strategy, along with soup to nuts app design development and support. Additionally, Propelics offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. My guest today is James Hoshor. James and I work together at Propelics, and he's been a guest of Device Squad before. He is a senior mobile strategist and a solutions architect with over 20 years experience in executive leadership, strategic planning, marketing, and business development in information technology. For the past 10 years, James has worked with clients across many industry verticals, as we all do at Propelics, including financial services, insurance, retail, and manufacturing, to identify and deliver products that result in market differentiating solutions and great user experiences. And today we're going to be talking about mastering the art of mobile testing. So we'll be going over why it's so important for your testers to understand the mobile environment, having the right testing tools and resources, and why that's important, understanding key testing methods when it comes to mobile enterprise, and why adopting a mobile testing strategy is actually very important. So, James, let's do things a little differently. Why don't you tell us a story about the most interesting digital or mobile project you worked on?
Sure. So let me think about that for a second. So one that comes to mind was probably one of my first forays into mobile, back in 2010, 2011, when mobile's really starting to pick up and start getting adopted across the enterprise. I was working for a small consultancy here in Omaha, and one of our clients was a startup, and they were actually trying to capitalize on iPads. The iPads were fairly new. They just got really introduced in 2010. And they came up with this idea to use iPads as a kiosk that they were going to go sell advertising space on to colleges, universities, and our armed services organizations to run on these kiosks inside of high schools. Primarily inside of, they strategically place them inside of like the cafeteria or the commons areas where they get a lot of foot traffic. So, it would be a good way to do some advertising, some quick 30-second commercials, get the attention of these kids and put the University of Texas or Nebraska or MIT or the Army up in front of them all the time to help with recruitment. So good idea, we thought, right? So, as these ads were continuously running and displaying on these wall-mounted monitors, the students could then walk up and at any time tap on that iPad, and the ads would still run, so anybody staying behind them could see, continuous running of these different colleges and university ads. But the student then was presented with a short little contact, form to fill out, and so they could put obviously their name, if they want to be contacted via email or home phone or cell number at that time, and then they could go through and check which one of those advertisers that they actually wanted to receive information from. So. Great concept. We're like, wow, this is really cool. We're excited to develop this with them. So we got this launched out there and we're thinking, yeah, no problem. But, there was a few unknowns back in the day, especially when iPads first came out. And there were some features and functions that we just haven't really had experience with or kind of worked the kinks out, so to speak. And certainly back then, you didn't think about that from a testing perspective of all these different nuances that we now are aware of today. We'll talk about a little bit later, but it's like one of the things that unfortunately caught us off guard and surprised us a little bit is these kids are pretty smart these days. And some kids figured out how to go in and jailbreak these iPads, and let's just say they displayed some things that they shouldn't have been displaying in a school environment. Some inappropriate sites, if you know what I mean, right?
Yeah.
And so, long story short, we had a few administrators contacting that startup company and saying, hey, we got to figure out how to prevent students from hacking into these iPads, so to speak, and be able to display some naughty sites or materials out there, right? So
it sounds like you needed some better testing.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And those were things. Mobile was new back then. So we're certainly a lot more experienced now and understanding of how to test and make sure that none of those things happen again.
That's funny. I've actually built a couple of iPad kiosks. We did one for Guinness, one for Nintendo, and I don't remember any stories of anybody hacking them, but I remember it was all about getting rid of the home button, removing access to that home button through like an enclosure. That was so critical. That's funny.
Yeah, it wasn't well thought out. So needless to say, they got a little bit of exposed.
There you go. The home button and other things. You've just given us an example of why mobile testing is so important that I think will hit home for a lot of people listening. But let's get into it a little bit more. Why is it so important for testers to have a very specific understanding for and experience with mobile?
Well, the short story I gave there, the example is there's so many different complexities and challenges today, right, that mobile presents that we never even thought of or even had to face when we were developing applications for desktops or the web, right? So there's just a lot of things that can really expose your mobile applications. With mobile applications, because it's given us so much freedom that, we've become a little bit impatient. We've become accustomed to having mobile apps just literally give us the freedom to search things, to buy things, to, quickly navigate to certain areas, right? And so as a user, we've kind of gotten this spoiled in this expectation. And I tell you, if we have one bad experience with that mobile app that we're using at that time, you better believe we'll run to tell everybody, right? We're going to post it on the app, the app store in a review. We're going to put up on social media. And most likely we're just going to delete that app because, I had a bad experience and for whatever reason that upset me so much that I'm going to delete it. Sometimes people even delete it, within seconds of downloading the app for the very first time if it's that terrible of experience, just because our expectations with mobile are so high now.
Yeah, and particularly in the enterprise, the stakes are so much higher where a bug could mean disastrous consequences.
Oh yeah, it could cost a client relationship. It could cost thousands of dollars if a contract was done incorrectly or something failed that caused operational impacts and stuff. So mobile users, they don't really care what device you tested on or what operating systems. It doesn't matter if they have a bad experience, then it's the game's over. So I think, with mobile testers, they or at least testers that are starting to venture in testing mobile applications as the enterprises are starting to adopt this more as the norm, they really need to understand the different challenges and complexities out there. So, one of the things that we highly recommend at Propelics is that, testers get involved in the early stages of mobile design and development. The traditional waterfall approach is testers would get involved towards the end of a project, right? And they get a functional document and then they write their test cases and stuff. And then they do testing after everything's already been built. Well, today you can't get away with that anymore. Best practices, the most advantageous to make sure you're going to ultimately deliver that best user experience so no one deletes your app or gets that frustrated, is get your testers involved up front. Getting them involved with the UI UX design so they understand the user interface, the user experience, how things are going to be developed, what technologies, are there any type of things that this app is going to enable a user to do that they might not be used to or might be a little bit unique. One of the things that we see from mobile complexities is testing for offline usage, different form factors. So if you're developing a hybrid app or a mobile web solution, a lot of companies don't think about, that, hey, my screen's going to render differently on an iPhone 6 versus a tablet or versus, even wearables nowadays, right? So there's a lot of different things to consider that's creating this complexity that is really causing a tester that has that experience doing web and client server to really stop and think, well, I need to understand this better. And so those are the things that we're constantly consulting with our clients on and helping them become educated on and trained on, looking for those different complexities and make sure they address them when they're doing their mobile app design and development, and getting the testers engaged early enough so they can do the proper testing on that.
You and I both work with our own in-house testing team every day. I don't know about you, but even with that much interaction, I'm really just dealing with the bug reports. But I hear about, the applications they use, TestRail, and I hear about smoke tests and validations and regression tests, but I still don't know about all the tools that they use or the details of how to use them. So what does an enterprise really need to successfully test their mobile solutions?
That's a great question. And we actually are getting asked this probably more frequently than ever now, as wearables and the different form factors and different platforms and technologies out there. It's becoming even more critical to ensure you have the right tools. So one of the things that we're doing at Propelics is we're actually working with our clients to do proof of concepts. So making sure that they can really identify the best testing solution out there for their mobile testing roadmap and the types of applications and platforms that they're going to be delivering on. So, this recent client I was just actually working with the last probably 2 months, we performed a testing proof of concept to help them identify mobile automation testing solutions. They were looking at starting to deploy a lot of apps out there across the enterprise. Nothing customer facing. It's primary internal employee apps. They have a couple thousand employees that work out in various remote regions. This happened to be an oil and gas organization, so they've got folks that are working out in very remote rural areas that don't have the best cell coverage or no Wi-Fi and so forth. So, they want to make sure that they had the right testing tools that would enable them to test those different types of situations out there. So when they actually delivered their mobile applications, that they could design them, one, to work in a remote region for offline, but be able to test that even the offline modes of that application work successfully, or at least met the requirements of what it was supposed to for that end user. So, we looked at a whole myriad of different solutions out there, and we ended up narrowing it down to 3 different solutions to test in this proof of concept. And I'll actually give you a kind of a synopsis, a little pros and cons of what we saw with some of the top ones that we looked at. This company actually happened to be, they're a big Microsoft technology user. And so right out of the gate, they were thinking, okay, we're Microsoft. We're going to look at Microsoft tools around testing. They're doing a lot of work with Xamarin. Xamarin's a great mobile app development platform out there. They've actually created a testing platform, the Xamarin Test Cloud. And so naturally you're thinking, this will work and meet our needs. So when we started really going and doing the POC, one of the things we think is very important that our clients need to understand is they have to understand, everything about their mobile solutions, the features, the functionality, that user experience and workflow, the connectivity requirements, things like we talked about with, are they going to have 1G available, no connectivity, and start formulating the test cases to ensure that they test all those different scenarios. And then that can then be used to really vet out these testing solutions. So when we start looking at a tool like Xamarin, Xamarin provides a lot of great capabilities, and especially if you're a Microsoft organization, you're developing, using Xamarin for your mobile development platform. It's really good for the development team to use. They can use it as their for unit testing and so forth. It does provide the automation testing. They can also do the manual testing. But some of the things that we saw that were a little bit of a drawback for at least this particular client's needs is it actually requires their source code into building with Calabash. And so then you had to use the Xamarin UI test script and so forth in there. So their testers aren't experienced with that. And so they're actually, we're looking for a solution that used a little bit more common test script creation tools and things that didn't require their source code, because this company also has a mentality of, we would like to buy or download mobile apps instead of always have the build. And so when you're doing that, you don't always have the luxury of having source code and things. So another thing they also noticed is when we were doing the POC is that while Xamarin met a lot of the criteria, some of the other things that didn't really provide for them as far as their criteria needs was the ability to test the carrier networks. And that was huge, because in some of these remote, desolate areas, it literally was, if you were on one side of the highway, Verizon worked great, but as soon as you walked across the highway, it didn't work so great. So the ability to test network connectivity, 1G all the way up to 4G and so forth, was definitely one of the high functionalities that they were looking at for a testing solution. The next one we looked at was Telex. Telex, owned by Progress, been around for 30 years. They recently, in the last 10 years, had ventured into the testing space as well. Again, good solution. Nothing ultimately wrong with any of the solutions we're talking about here, but we're just pointing out that, there's specific criteria and functionality that you need to ensure that your testing tools can provide to make sure that you deliver that ultimate experience. One of the things that we noticed with Telex was that it was really good for like mobile web testing. had a really nice feature where you can do your record and play. It actually created the test scripts for you, and really great from that feature. What they haven't really perfected well is in the more mobile app, like native hybrid testing components of that. So again, they required, source code to be able to compile and create the automated testing for native apps. You had to use their proprietary Telex extensions in there. And so there were some things that we were quickly recognizing that didn't give as much flexibility. You had to use their proprietary tools. They weren't able to test the carrier networks. And so that was a couple strikes against them, even though overall, especially on a mobile web perspective, they're probably one of the best solutions actually out in the marketplace. And then the third one we looked at was Perfecto. Perfecto has been around for 10 years as well. Huge presence globally, over 1,500 customers out there. Really good at the mobile aspect of things, but just like we talked about with Telex, Perfecto started out as a mobile testing solution and has just really ventured into the web testing aspect of things. And so that was one of the downfalls. They're just not as mature in mobile web testing. And our particular client here, some of the applications, again, were going to be across different platforms. So they wanted to make sure they could test web as well as hybrid and native. But the nice things about Perfecto is that it does provide the ability to test all the carrier networks. You can do offline testing with it. You can leverage different tools for creating your test scripts. It also had a nice record and play capability. And even probably the biggest benefit is you could use binary files for your mobile apps and quickly upload those mobile apps into the Perfecto testing platform. So you didn't need source code or anything else to do that. You didn't need to write any custom scripts and things. So gave them a lot of flexibility and certainly met the needs for a lot of their mobile use cases, especially with folks out in the field. So at the end of the day, the one that they ultimately thought was going to be the best solution for them ended up not being the one that was recommended or the one that they chose. And so it's important to do these proof of concepts. It's important to understand your mobile use cases and all the features and functionality. So as you start looking at tools, you can make sure that you pick the right tool that's going to not only meet your needs today, but certainly as you're continuing to develop mobile solutions in the future.
Thanks for that, James. That's really helpful. You mentioned connectivity, and we think of connectivity as kind of an edge case, but I was just thinking about that. Like for us at Propelics, some of our big clients are Cintas and DLL, and connectivity is a huge issue because we're talking about these apps for drivers who are on the road going into these remote areas. Their phones or their iPads are maybe switching from network to network as they drive. And then for a worker who might take a device into an office with the app open, now we're talking about is the device going to, switch to Wi-Fi once they go into the office? But now in the office, there's additional sign in to get onto that Wi-Fi network. There are so many connectivity issues that arise for us.
You're right. There's a lot of complexities around that and testing for that, certainly.
So another question I hear from clients all the time, and this harkens back to the connectivity issue also, is it always better to test on physical devices, or can emulators do the job just as well these days? I know the golden rule used to be that physical devices are key, but does this still hold true? Because, obviously it's pretty difficult for the average company to possess one of every device.
Yeah, that's it's a good question. I certainly get that asked quite a bit as well, and it's a tough one. There isn't the simple answer because both present a lot of positives. But like what you just stated, it's hard for an organization to literally go out there and purchase every device and be able to keep a test lab current with all these different versions of Androids out there and the iPhones and even wearables and stuff. So testing on all these different devices definitely is a challenge in itself. So, when you look at emulators, they really provide an efficient way to test in an interactive development process. So most companies that are developing mobile today are using this iterative, agile-like process. And emulators really do lend itself well to that type of a process. But the downside of that is like what you were just talking about with connectivity and ensuring that, you can test properly for that. The emulators don't really allow you to test those different types of scenarios. For like offline, they certainly don't give you that user experience to test. So like a physical device, when you're holding the device and you're going through and working through your application and the user experience by tapping or swiping or speaking, whatever feature capabilities in there, you can't do that with an emulator. So that's where it really swings back to the other side where, physical devices ultimately do really allow you to properly test mobile solutions. So we always highly recommend testing with a physical device as kind of the one last steps before you launch out into the marketplace. Some of the testing solutions I just talked about, with Xamarin and Telex and Perfecto, the nice thing about these testing solutions, is, especially some of the ones that are mature like those three, is they actually do have device test clouds. So you can leverage those to access physical devices without making an investment in having 50 different physical devices in your lab. And so you can upload your applications into those testing platforms, go in there and reserve, or sometimes companies work out arrangements where they have their own private cloud. So they have dedicated devices to them all the time based on what they select. So they can go in there and say, I want an iPhone 6 running 10.2.1. And I want to be able to use a Verizon network, and I want to be able to test online and offline. And so these types of tools, tying back to that earlier conversation, gives that organization the capability to test on a physical device without having the investment and the worry of upkeeping and refreshing that lab, right? So what they do is they have these global data centers out there that have these physical devices inside of the data center. If you can imagine, this giant room with all these physical devices hooked up, you essentially, if you're on a shared service plan, you can go in there and select and reserve that particular device that meets that criteria, as I mentioned, from OS and vendor and connectivity, et cetera. And then, what it will do is it'll allow you to, through your desktop, your laptop, whatever you're using to run your testing platform, you can actually go through and still do the touching to go through and test some of those features that an emulator cannot provide. But there is definitely no replacement of testing on an actual physical mobile device that you can literally touch and hold, take outside to see if the sun or the daylight affects the screen, things of that nature.
Yeah, like seeing if the UI is too crowded, or even just things like whether or not buttons are hard to press. I mean, so that's kind of like a cross between an emulator and having the real device.
Yeah, I'd say that's a good way. It's kind of a hybrid, if you will.
Yeah.
Pun intended, right?
So what about when it comes to like mobile versus web? Are there different testing methods for testing native mobile apps versus like mobile web or client server based apps?
Yeah, definitely. That's probably one of the biggest areas that we see companies really struggling with. Is so what testers really need to know is that, they've got this great testing organization. They've been testing for years on client server and web-based applications. They have their standards testing methods that they use, unit testing and functional and UAT and regression, right? But there's so many more methods nowadays, as we've talked about the different complexities and nuances with mobile, that testing organizations really need to adopt and start leveraging to ensure they have that great mobile user experience at the end of the day when they launch their app into the marketplace. So at Propelics, there's really these big blocks of testing that we always talk to our clients about, and there's 10 types of testing methods that we go through and we look at when we're looking at the maturity level of a testing organization to see, are they doing all 10 of these? Are they doing some of these? Like I mentioned, some only do functional and UAT and unit testing. And so, it's a real eye opener. you don't mind, I'll take a couple minutes here. We'll just walk quickly through what these 10 are. Obviously, the first one we mentioned was functional. Most companies are doing functional testing today, which is really the validation of your features and your functionality that you've developed and delivered in your app. So that covers things like unit testing, happy path, negative testing, smoke testing, etc. So, functional is pretty standard. Every organization gets that. They do it fairly well. One of the ones that we see some companies do well, some companies don't really do well, is integration testing, which is really, something that should be performed during your development of your apps, right? So we like to recommend that as you complete a sprint, if you're doing an agile type delivery methodology, at the end of a sprint, you do your integration testing. And this really helps, testing out the modules and how well they're tying together with other capabilities of the application and the behaviors that have been developed in the previous sprints there. So just an example is, a user can perform a search of a historical data on the app while connected, let's say cellular network, right? And then that app makes an API or web service call to the backend system to retrieve and display the historical data requested. So that's just one simple integration test that you can do and that we're referring to. The next one that we talk to clients about, and again is sometimes overlooked, is what we call non-functional testing. These tests, really the aspects of mobile that may not be, again, thought of more than they should be. So non-functional is really testing like what we were talking about, your cellular network connectivity, offline capabilities. If you've got different peripheral devices that you may be, connecting to your mobile application or your mobile device. You mentioned Cintas or, companies that have folks out in the field all the time. This is critical to test these things. So as we talked about with the different testing tools, the ability to test your different signal strengths, test offline or no connection at all. Connections that are lost in the middle of a transaction, how does the app handle that, right? Those are different types of tests for a non-functional testing method. The next one is interoperability. And so this really tests whether your mobile app is compatible with other applications, backend systems, and promotes your cross-use functionality. So this kind of testing is now important as many different kinds of technology are being built into architecture. So one of the projects I'm working on right now, we're actually leveraging a mobile backend as a service, which is a great solution. It's going to provide a lot of benefits to them, but testing the front end to the connectivity of an MBAS like that, then ultimately through an API gateway manager into your backend system presents some different challenges out there, especially with the functionality of your mobile application. So one of the tests that we would run on for interoperability for a mobile solution is like voice or SMS interrupts. So if a user is actually, they're on their device and they receive a phone call or they receive a text message while they're using their mobile application, how does the app handle that? Does it shut down? Does it interrupt the data sync if you were trying to sync some data at that time? So it's really important from that interoperability standpoint, especially when there's multiple technologies that are being used to deliver a solution, to test that. A few more to go here. Memory leak, really quickly, is be able to test how the app functions when local data storage of an app or device becomes too large or full. That's something that's obviously more commonly overlooked than not. And they launch their app out to production. They've got thousands of users using their mobile application. And all of a sudden, they start seeing performance issues or getting a lot of feedback regarding the performance. And most of the time, it's related to memory leak issues, which ties into the next one, the performance. This really is undertaken to check the performance behavior of the application under certain conditions. Like we talked about, memory leaks, low battery, bad network coverage, things like that. So it's really important from a performance standpoint to test your applications. So a couple examples here. Stress test the app against large volumes of users coming from a geographical location. Page rendering and load time, having your users test that. It's always good during UAT to do these types of tests. Task or activity response time. certainly, as we talked about at the very beginning of the podcast, we all get frustrated if the app's not responding quick enough. We think things should be like milliseconds. And depending on connectivity or some of these things that, network coverage, it could take seconds instead of milliseconds. So it's always good to test for that. Another thing that's fairly commonly overlooked is the installation, right? So testing your mobile applications, whether if it's coming from a pre-installed application in your device, so maybe you use a MDM or a MAM solution, a mobile application management, or you're actually having your users just download it from the public app store. One way is to test your installation method is do a fresh install of an app, uninstall and then reinstall your app. Test when you go to do version upgrades or updates to that OS and see what happens from an installation standpoint. The next one is definitely probably one of the most important ones out there, which is around security. And this should obviously be performed every time, especially with all the malicious attacks and different things we're hearing in the news all the time. This is really where you're checking for your vulnerabilities to hacking and authentication, your authorization policies and stuff. So one of the things at Propelics we always recommend is running a vulnerability scan. We use different tools for this. One of the tools we use is IBM's ASA scan tool. And this really helps us test against the OWASP vulnerabilities out there. Again, very important to test from a security standpoint. One of the things that you were just talking about, was usability. It's really important. As we mentioned, users are quick to delete your app if they're struggling with it from a performance, but certainly from a usability standpoint. So, usability is really used to verify your applications, providing the right experience from how the workflow is of the app. Are the buttons easy to touch? We mentioned earlier about taking the app outside. Does the screen get washed out in the sunlight because of the colors that were used from a UI perspective? So there's a lot of different things you can test from a usability standpoint. A lot of apps now with chatbots and artificial intelligence that's being introduced, so they're allowing users to talk into it, like when you're talking to Siri or Alexa, making sure that all flows seamlessly and doesn't present any issues. And then really the last testing method we talk to clients about, this one's probably not as important unless companies are really going on a global scale with their mobile applications. And this one refers to language testing. So this is more of testing applications that are incorporating like multi-currency, multi-language, are going to be having apps that are used across multiple time zones and locations out there. So it's really important to make sure that, again, you're testing that if that is a mobile use case scenario for your applications out there. So, that kind of summarizes some of those key testing methodologies that we use and recommend for our clients out there.
James, thanks for that. That's an awesome comprehensive overview. That's great. Since I started working for Propelics like 5 years ago, we've expanded our portfolio of services. And so now Propelics offers kickstarts in both manual testing strategy and mobile testing automation. A lot of our clients obviously wonder which strategy is best for them. So can you talk about the different factors a company should consider when trying to decide which strategy to use for its mobile efforts? If testing automation is out there, why not just automate everything?
We get that asked quite a bit. In fact, one of the more recent clients I was working with said the exact same thing. I mean, it was quote unquote, can't we just automate everything? It's never a simple one. Automation provides a lot of great benefits. In fact, where we're seeing automation drive the highest value for mobile testing is truly actually once you have your mobile app developed and in production. Automation is by far the best way to go, highly recommended. And that's why it certainly was important to you identify the right tools to assist you with your mobile testing automation. Because once you get your app into production, you're really just doing small feature enhancements, things that can quickly be added to your automated testing scripts and run that a lot more efficient. And with these tools today, most of these tools are easily integrated into your testing management solutions. So if you're using like VSTS or using some other test case management and defect management tool. When you do a build and you're getting ready to test that in an automated fashion, it can run through those automated test scripts, and if it detects a bug or a defect or any issue, it automatically can log that for you in your test management tool. And so, that's by far where automation really lends a lot of value and certainly minimizes the amount of effort from an actual physical tester being involved. But it's hard to get away from manual testing. When you're actually building your mobile apps for the very first time and you're going through that design, development, integration process, manual testing is just really hard to get away from. In fact, to automate that is just so challenging and cumbersome that it just really isn't the best choice. And that's why we're saying automation is really best suited for once your app's in production. Manual is really better suited and highly recommended by us for sure when you're actually building your apps for the first time. That goes with major releases. So when you're actually doing your major releases, you can do manual testing for that. And certainly once it's in production and you do some minor releases, automated testing from a regression standpoint is perfect. It's great, provides the best value.
And this might sound a little crazy, but why is it important to have a mobile testing strategy in the first place? Like, why can't a company just hire a bunch of testers and let them do their thing? Why is having a formalized strategy so important?
It goes to what we've talked about today in this podcast. There's so many complexities and nuances out there that if you don't have the right plan for it and that strategy, you're just going to set yourself up for failure. So one of the things we always highly recommend, and we do this as part of our normal enterprise mobility strategy kickstarts, is going in first and thoroughly understanding the adequacy of a testing organization and their capabilities to see what gaps do exist. Some companies are fairly well set up. They just don't have the right knowledge base and tools and things. But other companies, certainly there possesses a lot of gaps. And so it's really important from a strategy standpoint to identify those gaps and identify how you can fill those gaps, whether it's having the right mobile testing tools, making sure you have the right processes in place and procedures, or even the right skill sets, as we've talked about. Testers that have been accustomed to testing web applications and client-server-based applications aren't familiar with the different complexities that mobile presents, like we talked about earlier, form factors, connectivity, accessibility, those types of things, right? So those are definitely things that have to be taught. You can't just go from testing a client-server, maybe an old VB client-server application, right, which is really dating myself, to, testing an iOS application. So while most companies have QA testers, those are definitely things that they are still lacking out there. So, having a well-defined testing strategy really should incorporate having a solid end-to-end testing methodology, having the right test plans and test cases that are written specifically for your mobile applications out there. Those are so critical in how you write those. And as we mentioned and talked through the 10 different types of testing methods, those all need to be part of your strategy and your methodologies out there. So a lot of companies, like we said, have those skill sets already. It's just the awareness of the different types of tools and methodologies that they do need to have. So, just one of the key takeaways real quick, mobile testing really does require a strict attention to detail, creativity, outside of the box thinking, and the know-how to ask the right questions to uncover those edge cases to ensure the best possible mobile experience that you're going to deliver to your target users, whether it's consumers or employees or vendors out there. It takes all those different attributes to really have a good success in mobile testing.
That's great. Thanks a lot, James. By the way, being old in this company is an asset. We're old. We've been around. We know the ropes. We've seen it all.
Yep. we definitely have seen it all, right? I remember back in PDAs when they first came out, right? So,
well, that's right. The Newton.
Right. Of course, some of us are dating ourselves back to punch cards. So,
Yeah, I don't go back that far. James, really great. Really great overview. And I hope people found that helpful. There's a lot that got covered there in that last hour. And James, thanks again for hopping on.
No problem, Steve. It's always a pleasure to do these podcasts with you. And again, I hope our prospective clients as well as our existing clients gain value from listening to this. So,
exactly. And thank you all for tuning into another episode of Device Squad, the podcast for the mobile enterprise from Propelics. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye. Take care. Gotta go round up the chickens, get them all back in the coop.